Let's get give the digital team notes. The Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Commerce will now come to order. Today, we will hold a legislative hearing entitled Holding Big Tech Accountable, Legislation to Protect Online Users. Due to COVID-19, members can now participate in today's hearing either in person, remotely, or remotely online via conference, and in accord with the updated guidelines issued by the attending physician, members, staff, and members of the press can participate in the hearing room and are not required to wear masks. For members participating remotely, your microphones will be set on mute for the purpose of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members participating remotely will need to unmute your microphones each time that you wish to speak. Please notice that once you've unmuted your microphone and anything that is said can be heard over the loudspeakers, so you don't want to do that. Since members are participating from different locations at today's hearing, all recognition of members shall such for questions will be in the order of subcommittee seniority. Documents for the record can be sent to Ed Kazmersky at the email address that was provided to staff, and all documents shall be entered into the record at the end of the conclusion of the hearing. The chair now recognizes herself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. So today we begin the third legislative hearing of the Energy and Commerce Committee to consider legislation to rein in big tech. This subcommittee has worked long and hard to respond to the challenges presented by big tech. But despite our scrutiny and repeated calls for change, the tech industry has not responded. Now is the time for change and for accountability. We know social media platforms can be used for good, and we have seen in the last week the heroic stories of Ukrainian people and the amazing fight back that they have shown and courage that they have shown. But misinformation and disinformation are seemingly still amplified, and that is having dramatic costs for people around the world. For example, Russian state-owned media is targeting Spanish speakers around the globe with disinformation to when it comes to the what is going on in the invasion of Ukraine. Previously, social media abetted a genocide in Myanmar and a deadly insurrection on January 6th. We are done with apologies and denials from big tech companies. We are done turning a blind eye when billionaires build economic empires by feeding Americans an ever-increasing diet of disinformation. It is time to regulate. So we will be considering 5 bills today. Ms. Eshu's bill, the banning, surveillance, what does that say? What? Okay. The Banning Surveillance Advertising Act, which I am a proud co-sponsor of, to ban targeting advertising that can track individual users across the internet. Ms. Clark's bill, the Algorithms Accountability Act, will require technology companies using artificial intelligence to assess the impact of their algorithms on consumers. Disinformation, discrimination rather, of protected classes has no place in our digital world. Ms. Trahan's bill, the Digital Service Oversight and Safety Act, improves transparency for consumers and ensures that research can measure the impact of social media on our society. Mr. Bilirakis's bill, the Capture Act, that's the short title, studies whether law enforcement has the resources to keep us safe online. Mr. Mullen's bill, the increasing consumer education on law enforcement acts empowers consumers to protect themselves. So as we refine these proposals, I have no doubt that can help create a fairer, safer internet, one that protects consumers and whose business model isn't rooted in disinformation. So I look forward to the hearing and welcome all the comments of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle so that we can work together on this. And with that, I would like to welcome the ranking member, Mr. Bilirakis, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chair. Good morning, and welcome to today's subcommittee legislative hearing. Our witnesses. Today's hearing is the third in a series of what the majority calls holding big tech accountable. I certainly hope the fourth will be on a national privacy and data security framework. For the December hearing, Republicans invited TikTok to testify as our witness, since they are not at the center. They are at the center of many of our shared concerns, but TikTok declined. For this hearing, I appreciate that the majority backed our efforts to invite the company, this particular company, TikTok, this time on a bipartisan basis, but sadly, TikTok declined yet again. I know this isn't what you want, Madam Chair. I certainly don't want it either. So, again, very disappointing, and we're not going to give up. Madam Chair, if we put our heads together, I'm sure we can figure out a way to get this particular company, TikTok, before our subcommittee, like so many others who have appeared as part of our country's democratic process. How very arrogant of them. But again, we're not going to give up. We need to hear from TikTok. The legislation today covers a broad range of issues. Now, not just hear from TikTok. We need to ask questions of TikTok. While I share many of the same concerns as my colleagues regarding big tech's abuse of power. I worry about proposals that miss the target and hurt other parts of our economy. Without more careful vetting, these bills will lead to a worse consumer experience, adversely impact American innovators and small businesses, and increase market dominance for large companies, specifically Google in this case. So far this Congress, this committee has heard from academics, industry experts, and consumer advocates, which is great. I'm pleased that today we finally get to hear from law enforcement's perspective. They are on the front lines, and I know you agree, Madam Chair, of protecting our kids online, which is a primary focus in our fight against big tech. And thank you again for holding this hearing. I'm proud to welcome Mike Duffy, a law enforcement officer based in my home state of Florida, who has dedicated more than 20 years of his career to protecting our Floridians and our nation's children from predators and other dangerous threats online. Law enforcement's insights are critically important as we consider multiple avenues to rein in the abuses perpetrated by big tech. I believe two bills under consideration today will help. First, we've got the H.R. 6786, the Increasing Consumers' Education on Law Enforcement Resources Act, introduced by my good friend, Representative Mullen. It will require FTC and attorneys general to develop a public education program to inform our constituents about law enforcement resources regarding online safety. The second is my bill, and thank you for mentioning it, Madam Chair, and agendaing the bill, H.R. 6755, the Cooperation Among Police, Tech, and Users to Resist Exploitation Act, or the Capture Act, which will require the Government Accountability Office to research and provide recommendations on how to improve coordination and consultation between social media companies and law enforcement without creating constitutional issues. Some here may recognize the single point of contact proposal as it currently exists in the FirstNet framework. This is a model I'm looking to apply to tech platforms so federal, state, and local law enforcement have clarity on who is reaching out to these companies in order to tackle harms online. Given the connection to today's Democratic bills have on privacy and data security, I know my friend, the chair, will appreciate me once again emphasizing the importance of passing a national privacy and data security law. Even the House Administration Committee just held a hearing on a national privacy standard. We are all concerns. Leader Rogers, and I'm sure she'll confirm this, and I remain fully committed to working across the aisle with anyone to enact a truly comprehensive privacy and data security law, and I urge my colleagues to join me in these efforts. Thank you again for allowing me to participate today, and I look forward to the discussion, especially how these proposals will help protect our kids online. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bilirakis, and I do look forward to very soon dealing with a comprehensive privacy bill. I think we're on our way. And let me now welcome the chair of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky. Today's hearing is the third in a series of hearings this committee has held on legislative reforms to hold social media companies accountable. The two previous legislative hearings covered reforms to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act and consumer protection-focused legislation to help build a safer internet. Today, we'll examine legislation to enhance transparency and further promote safety online. These hearings come after years of repeated bipartisan calls for social media companies to change their ways. Since 2018, the committee has held 8 hearings on this subject. We've examined these issues from all sides, and now it's time for us to come together and to act. We're committed to working with our Republican colleagues on legislation to increase transparency, limit online manipulation, and improve online safety. And we all know how important social media is to our daily lives. It allows us to connect with family and friends, to organize, and to stay safe. And we're seeing that firsthand right now in Ukraine as images posted on social media are exposing the world to just how depraved and misguided Vladimir Putin's actions are. Ukrainians armed with their smartphones are documenting the bravery of their fellow citizens standing up to the Russian military and the brutality of war. Social media is allowing Ukrainians to spread the word without any filters of the true impacts of this war. The images they're capturing on their phones are being shown worldwide, showing the world the atrocities being inflicted on the Ukrainian people. But at the very same time, we have seen weeks of Russian disinformation campaigns used to lay the groundwork for the invasion of Ukraine. These campaigns use propaganda to build support for the Kremlin, and unfortunately, they spread like wildfire online. And there's no question that fast-moving current events can be difficult for social media companies to respond to quickly, but that is their responsibility, and they must be held accountable. We must ensure they are transparent and their incentives align with the good social media can do for people and not the bad. Today, we'll discuss 5 bills that target different parts of the social media ecosystem to make platforms safer for users. One of the best ways to make these companies more accountable is to make them more transparent. We'll discuss legislation that establishes an Office of Independent Research Facilitation at the FTC. This new office would help facilitate academic research on social media platforms to help us get the data we need on how these companies are targeting users. Another bill requires companies that use automated decision-making to conduct impact assessments on their systems and regularly report the results to the FTC. Now, these assessments will help ensure that machine learning is being employed in a fair and non-discriminatory manner. We'll also consider a bill to ban the practice of targeted advertising, which includes a provision prohibiting advertisers from using information that identifies the consumer as a member of a protected class for advertising purposes. And finally, we'll consider bills that will help social media companies work better with federal, state, and local law enforcement to protect users who feel their safety has been violated online. Now, these proposals, along with the proposals we considered in the 2 previous legislative hearings, are collectively major steps in addressing the real harms caused by big tech. Another part of tech accountability is protecting people's privacy. I know that both the ranking member of the subcommittee and the chairwoman mentioned this and have been involved with this. And we're particularly concerned about our children's privacy as more and more apps are used by and targeted to our kids. I think every member of this committee agrees that more must be done on privacy, and that's why we have been working since last Congress on a bipartisan staff draft. Our work on that legislation continues, and I hope the Republicans will work together with us on that as well. The bills before us today collectively address tech accountability. The time to act is now, and these bills can help us make the internet a safer place, and I look forward to our discussion today and obviously hearing from our excellent panel. I yield back, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for all that you've done on these issues. You really have been working on them for a long time, and it's made a difference in terms of where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now, wearing her Ukrainian yellow,
That's right.
I want to recognize Ms. Rogers, our ranking member, for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to say glory to Ukraine. Several of us on this committee had the opportunity to travel to Ukraine and were inspired at the time with their fight for self-determination and independence. And today, I continue to support their fight for freedom, and I pray for their strength and security and their freedom to prevail. While some tech companies have taken steps to prevent the proliferation of Russian state-sponsored propaganda, I hope that we too, on this subcommittee, will be vigilant in addressing how others, like Twitter, maintaining an account for the Kremlin, or TikTok, reinstating Russian state-owned media, are complicit in spreading it, as well as other disinformation campaigns from Putin. This has real-world consequences for the Ukrainians and our other European allies. We all share the goal of holding big tech accountable, especially for our children. Big tech platforms are my biggest fear as a parent. Nearly every conversation I have with parents in schools these days come back to the concerns about big tech and our kids. It's echoed by pediatricians, school administrators, and teachers. Big tech are not advocates for children. Our kids, the users, are their product, and they're being manipulated and exploited for profit. They're being exposed to cruelty, bullying, and induced to self-harm. These harms have been worsened by the move to virtual life because of government-imposed school closures and lockdowns. This committee can and must do more to address this crisis. If we're going to address issues with big tech and the advertising industry, that discussion includes improving transparency and accountability for how these businesses are collecting personal information, especially from our children. My Republican colleagues and I unveiled a privacy and data security framework last year. Addressing these issues in the hearing would help us make progress. One bipartisan bill we asked to be considered is the Wahlberg-Rush Child Online Privacy Protection Act update. Despite many changes being considered on the collection and use of data today, unfortunately, this one's still missing on the schedule. Also, if we're discussing emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, we should be addressing how AI can strengthen American leadership and reflect our values of freedom, human rights, and human dignity. These are issues that require time, education, and hearings to debate and identify common ground. A key component for many of these issues is the authority Congress grants to the Federal Trade Commission. The bills today proposed by the Democrats enact sweeping changes for the FTC. I appreciate that the Commission wants to be more involved in improving data security. We've been clear that we're willing to negotiate on additional authority. But changes like this must be given the appropriate time for discussion and vetting. We need to start by ensuring accountability and transparency from the FTC on its current authorities before we give them more power. The FTC should come before this committee to help us better understand how they would use additional authority, as well as provide us assurances it has its own house in order. For this reason, I sent a letter to Chair Khan yesterday on the FTC's recent enforcement announcements for the security vulnerabilities found in the open source software, specifically Log4j. Recent testimony in the Senate suggests government systems may have used Log4j. So we must learn whether agencies under our jurisdiction have system vulnerabilities that could be exploited, specifically by foreign actors like Russia or China. Missing from today's witness panel is TikTok, who declined an invitation to testify, and it's not the first time. TikTok threatens the safety, mental health, and well-being of our kids. A recent Wall Street Journal investigation found teen girls are developing tics from content they watch on TikTok. This is alarming, and their complete carelessness with people's personal information is even more concerning. TikTok's ties to China raise significant concerns regarding the amount of access the CCP has to information of Americans. We know TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, is an extension of this authoritarian regime. And now we see reports that TikTok is allowing Russian government propaganda to proliferate. TikTok operates with disregard for U.S. national security concerns. Our witness today, Officer Duffy, can share more on how they challenge the reach of local law enforcement as well. These concerns about privacy and big tech are issues we've been leading on, and we look forward to working together to address. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and the chair would like to remind members that pursuant to committee rules that all members' written opening statements shall be included in the record. And now I would like to introduce our witnesses for today's hearing. As you can see, two are here. Is that three in person? Oh, three in person, and one remotely. And I want to welcome Lori Lehman, who is Policy Analyst at Consumer Reports, Katie McInnes, who is Senior Public Policy Manager at DuckDuckGo.
DuckDuckGo.
I'm sorry, DuckDuckGo. That's a game. DuckDuckGo. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I want to also welcome Mike Duffy, who is Special Agent Supervisor in charge at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and Mutajay Nkonde, who is the founder and chief executive officer of AI at the what is this, public?
AI for the people.
Oh, AI for the People, US. There we go. So at this time, the chair will recognize each witness for 5 minutes to provide their opening statements. Before we begin, I want to make sure that I call attention for the witnesses that are testifying in person. In front of you, some of you have testified before, but if not, you will notice that there are lights in front of you, and the light will initially be green. The green will turn yellow when you have 1 minute remaining, and please begin to wrap up your testimony at that point. The light will turn red when your time has expired. For the witness who is testifying remotely, there is a timer on your screen that will count down your remaining time. And with that, let me ask Ms. Lehman. You are recognized now for your 5 minutes. Microphone.
Can't hear you, is it on?
All right, there we go?
There we go.
All right, thank you, Chair Schakowsky. Chairman Pallone, Ranking Member Rogers, Chair Schakowsky, Ranking Member Bilirakis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting Consumer Reports to testify today on the crucial matter of protecting consumers online. My name is Laura Lehman, and my work at CR focuses specifically on platform accountability, so that's where I'll spend most of my time today. For 86 years, consumers have turned to CR for answers to questions like, is this product safe? Is it worth my time or money? What risks might it pose to my family? Consumers today grapple with the same questions, but about their online experiences. Is this platform safe? Is it worth my time? Are the goods I'm buying from this ad authentic? Why am I seeing this ad again? Today's hearing grapples with this century's version of confronting the very same challenges that have driven CR's fight for a fair, just, and transparent marketplace all along. The bills before the subcommittee today seek these same aims, and we are excited to work with you to refine, craft, and pass legislation that can help us usher in the online ecosystem that consumers deserve. Consumers face a range of issues in the digital marketplace. In a nationally representative survey, CR found that of the 94% of Americans who said they had ever had at least one social media account, 84% had adjusted their social media settings at some point to limit or filter content in some way. 39% had elected to turn off targeted ads. 59% said that they had read news on a social media site they initially believed to be true, but later learned was made up. And 37% told us that they had, at some point, wanted to change their privacy settings on a social media platform, but didn't know how. And their concerns aren't limited to social media. They expand to e-commerce and the way that AI impacts their lives, as I elaborate on in my written testimony. Yet the digital marketplace is as varied in potential solutions as it is in its problems. Just as one no recall, safety standard, or warning label can unilaterally keep consumers safe offline, the variety of challenges consumers face online require a range of evidence-based policy solutions, from comprehensive transparency to expanded use of Section 5 authorities, to approaches grounded in consumer protection law, to cautious, narrow changes to Section 230, and certainly include a stronger, better-funded FTC. Auto and product manufacturers are expected to conduct safety testing, and CR can test cars and appliances for performance under stress to see how manufacturer claims line up with their advertising. Digital product manufacturers, however, have no such obligations to research, mitigate, or disclose risks or dangers in the ways their systems work. They are not required to publish clear community guidelines or terms of service, or report on how effective their enforcement of such guidelines may be, and they make no guarantees that they are appropriately staffing and equipping the teams dedicated to keeping consumers safe from harassment, spam, counterfeit products, hate speech, and misinformation. Transparency will be fundamental to all such evidence-based policy. In particular, 3 different kinds. I'd like to talk about pipelines, processes, and personnel. When I talk about pipeline transparency, we're talking about what factors influence what a consumer sees online, whether that's an algorithm, whether that's an ad, what components go into that. When we talk about process transparency, consumers deserve to know the rules of the road. What can they expect from their online communities, and how can they expect those rules to be enforced? When we talk about personnel, we're talking about when platforms fail consumers, how can we make sure that platform whistleblowers are empowered to make sure the public knows? And also, how are we making sure that platforms are appropriately staffed to enforce their terms of service everywhere they operate? CR's test track can figure out how cars handle stress because we have speedometers. Right now, no one can crash test ads and algorithmic recommendations except the platforms that profit from them. But transparency is the floor, not the ceiling, when it comes to building a more responsible online information ecosystem. Platforms clearly require stronger incentives to take responsibility for the harms they compound and accelerate. Across consumer products, it is well understood that companies should bear responsibility for design and process choices that lead to foreseeable preventable harms. Meanwhile, YouTube failed to ban vaccine misinformation until September 2021, when platforms like Pinterest had started as early as February 2019. CR investigations in 2020 showed that Facebook had approved ads with COVID-19 misinformation. Online platforms fail to take reasonable baseline steps to ensure their products are designed and managed responsibly. Consumers should be able to expect an online system where we can trust that platforms have values past those which they return to their shareholders. At the end of the day, consumers deserve a safe, just, and transparent digital marketplace that they can trust. Congress can and must work to pass legislation that makes it possible, and CR looks forward to working with you in pursuit of that aim. Thank you again for inviting CR today. I look forward to your questions and to today's discussion.
Thank you, and now Ms. McGinnis from DuckDuckGo is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Chair Schakowsky, Ranking Member Bilirakis, Chairman Pallone, Ranking Member McMorris-Rogers, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this important hearing and inviting me to testify. I'm here to discuss DuckDuckGo's privacy protective business model and why we need bills like the Banning Surveillance Advertising Act to protect individuals online and to reform the general market. DuckDuckGo is a privacy technology company. We believe that privacy is a human right and that being private online should be simple and accessible to all. With one download of the DuckDuckGo privacy browser for mobile or the DuckDuckGo Privacy Essentials browser extension for desktop, we offer seamless protection from surveillance ads by blocking trackers. This includes our email protection service, our tracker blocker technology, and our private search engine, which is the 4th largest in the United States and serves over 3 billion searches a month globally. Our company was founded in 2008 in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, and year after year we have seen record growth, proving users' interest in being private online. DuckDuckGo is robustly profitable and has been since 2014, thanks to our contextual ad model. Contextual advertisements are based on the content being shown on the screen and do not need to know anything about you. So if you go to DuckDuckGo and perform a search, let's say you search for mobile phones, we're going to serve you with ads for phones. It's as simple as that. Behavioral advertising, by contrast, is based on personal profiles from data collected both on and offline about you. Have you ever searched for something online and then saw an ad for that exact same thing pop up on another website or an app? Or maybe you thought that your phone is listening to you based on the creepy ads that you're seeing online? That's surveillance advertising. And rather than finding these ads useful, a majority of Americans think that this is a misappropriate use of their data. And it's no surprise, as it's a massive violation of their user privacy and data collection expectations. And it's not just that. data collection also results in additional harm like discrimination, identity theft, fraud, scams, and filter bubbles. The same personal information allows a company to target you with an ad also enables them to discriminate against you and others in the presentation of critical opportunities. And these harms are not just theoretical. For instance, the Department of Housing and Urban Development brought a case against Facebook, charging them with housing discrimination by allowing advertisers to restrict who saw ads based on race, religion, and national origin. This is a harm that was made possible thanks to data collection for surveillance ads. Online surveillance also enabled advertisers to use Google's ad targeting algorithm to present more men than women with ads for higher paying jobs. The practice of data collection, therefore, is not just about a user's privacy or data collection expectations, but about the presentation of critical access to opportunities and employment. Consumers should have an easy and effective way to avoid this surveillance. And as our history makes clear, internet companies can be successful and profitable with a contextual ad model. Studies have additionally shown that publishers receive very little significant increase in revenue by using behavioral ads. And in fact, many online advertising companies started with a contextual ad model, including Google. Until recently even, most of the ads you're seeing online were contextual ads. However, due to Google's acquisition of DoubleClick and Facebook's control of the ad duopoly with Google, there's been a focus on behavioral advertising, and innovation in contextual advertising has been severely suppressed. If data collection for targeted ads were banned, access to personal data would no longer determine whether companies would succeed or fail in the advertising market, meaning that more companies would be able to compete against Google and Facebook's ad duopoly. As surveillance ads result in measurable harm for users and little to no increase in revenue for publishers, we must ask, what is all this surveillance for if it's not just lining the pockets of Facebook and Google? As the House Antitrust Subcommittee report and reports from governments around the world demonstrate, access to personal data enables big tech to protect and entrench their dominant status online generally, and in the ad market in particular. A shift back to contextual advertising, therefore, would significantly reduce Google and Facebook's inherent advantages in advertising and beyond. Our mission at DuckDuckGo is to raise the standard of trust online. We therefore support bills like the Banning Surveillance Advertising Act that would do exactly that. Consumers should be protected from the harms surveillance advertising and data collection cause, like discrimination, identity theft, scams, and fraud. We believe that getting privacy online should be as simple as closing the blinds. Therefore, we urge Congress to pass bills that allow individuals to easily protect themselves and would also have the benefit of strengthening the online market. I'm pleased to answer your questions today and make myself available to members in the future for in-depth discussions about this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Duffy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman Schakowsky, and Ranking Members Bilirakis, and members of the Senate Committee. Thank you for inviting me today. I serve as Assistant Special Agent in charge for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Cyber High Tech Crime Unit. I started my law enforcement career during the AOL dial-up days, and in the 25 years since, I've seen massive changes in the way crime is committed and investigated. In that time, I've learned that whether crimes are committed in the virtual world or in the physical world, technology companies possess a large amount of essential evidence law enforcement needs to do our job, but lack the regulatory framework that enables efficient and lawful access to that evidence means that we are ineffective at reducing criminal threats, preventing victimizations, or getting justice for the victims. My investigative unit at FDLE, like thousands of others across local, state, federal law enforcement, is in a never-ending race to improve our access to digital evidence. We need money for training and tools to access evidence we can obtain from devices that we seize. But we are also facing increased challenges with the complete inability to access digital evidence when platforms deploy end-to-end encryption. Congress can help us address both of these issues. I want to share today with you a few examples of the challenges we are facing. Service providers are subject to little or no data retention requirements. In contrast, the banking industry is obligated to keep financial records for a certain period of time, In one example of how this can hurt our ability to respond to crisis, a young person was live streaming how he was going to commit suicide, potentially in front of a live audience. We immediately contacted the service provider that we had received this information and to try to attempt to determine where the user was located. We noted that the live stream appeared to have ended and the content provider was unable to find the record of the streaming event. We had nothing to follow up on if it had not been for the family's own posting that they had intervened. The lack of data retention requirements frustrates the most traumatic cases we deal with every day, which is the child sexual abuse cases. Service providers who do identify CSAM on their platforms are required to report it to our partners at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. An investigation then begins with an agency serving legal process to a company for internet protocol information in an attempt to identify where the activities were occurring. If the provider does not retain data, a user has deleted it, the child predator becomes hard to identify and stop. The lack of standard terminology regarding the exchange of legal process between law enforcement and service providers leads to great confusion. Unless the terms we use to determine certain types of data matches within the own company's unique corporate terms, law enforcement must engage in a lengthy back and forth, costing valuable time in an investigation. We have seen some service providers implement online portals that are designed to facilitate the request from law enforcement. These portals have been helpful in terms of improving timeliness and security of data that exchanged between both parties. The response time is anywhere from 1 month to 1 day. This lag can ultimately be dangerous to the cases we investigate. Most tech companies routinely provide law enforcement information when they really need it in an emergency, but determining the exigent is actually in the hands of tech companies. As a matter of federal law, we in law enforcement have the most relevant facts and content to determine exigency, but yet the companies are the one who have the final say. In one example, an individual made comments regarding being excited about July the 9th and wanting to do what Nicholas Cruz did. Cruz was the murderer who took 17 innocent lives and injured 17 others at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, Parkland, Florida, in 2018. This individual's social media post indicated they idolized Nicholas Cruz and appeared to have visited the location where Cruz was arrested. Upon review of this information, law enforcement provided the social media provider when asking relevant information about the user. The company unilaterally made a determination that they did not think the situation was an immediate threat at this time. Big tech platforms have transformed society in many ways for the better, others less so. Users of these platforms should expect that law enforcement officers charged with protecting them have a clear path to the evidence they need to punish the guilty and exonerate the innocent. The establishment of regulatory framework include standardized legal processes, guidelines, and address the issues that would benefit industry, law enforcement, and most importantly, the citizens we serve. Thank you again for your invitation, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Nkonde, I welcome you for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairwoman Schakowsky, Ranking Member
Ms.
Belarakis.
Oh, Ms. I'm
Ms.
sorry.
No problem. And Ranking Member McMorris Rogers. My name is Mitali Nkonde, and I'm the founder and executive director of AI for the People, a national nonprofit that uses strategic communications to really insert conversations around the impact that technology is having on society into public life. I'm here today in support of the Algorithmic Accountability Act that I have been working on really for the last 5 years as an advocate, and something that I'm happy that this committee is finally looking for. As a storyteller, the best way for me to really express the impact that machine learning protocols have on public life is through an illustration. So this committee is very aware of the dangers of social media algorithmic decision making, so I'm not going to go long, but I think that this will be illustrative in terms of the need for this act. In February 2022, Twitter users noticed that they were being shown ads from a company called OpenSea. OpenSea is a provider of NFTs or non-fungible tokens, which are parts of currency based in blockchain that can be traded. What these users were being offered were the ability to buy what were described as meta slaves. These were avatars of African American people that were put up for sale in the same way that people were sold in times of enslavement during this country. Upon AI for the people contacting Twitter to say that this had happened, we found that the account had been taken down from the platform, but news reports found that instead of removing that lot, what OpenSeas actually did was just add Asians and other non-white Americans to their platform. How did those slaves get onto those social media sites? Through a process called machine learning, that informs algorithmic decision makers and decides who and what people get to see on their social media feeds. This is an example of the way the combination of targeted advertising online, racial animus towards non-white Americans, and machine learning conflates to create unsafe online environments for Black people and other members of protected classes. The Algorithmic Accountability Act is important because what that would do would be to introduce impact assessments so that an office within the FTC could look at this potential use case and then decide, is this in the national best interest? I would argue that it's not, because we know from the investigation conducted by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, one of the tactics of hostile nations such as Russia is to really incite racial divides, and therefore, I would argue, undermine our national security as we divide against ourselves instead of looking outward to protecting this great nation. I argue that the Algorithmic Accountability Act, and even its what I would consider in many ways to be companion legislation, the Surveillance Advertising Act, provide an online environment in which people from protected classes can be safe. AI for the People as an organization really does seek to highlight the numerous ways in which advanced technological systems, and as we're looking to things like the metaverse, Web3, and NFTs, technologies that we're not really commonly speaking about, we need to keep the protection of civil rights in mind. These platforms are enriching the few without thinking about the ways in which they comply with laws that we have already standing. And as I finish my remarks, because of intellectual property laws, excuse the background noise, I come to you from Brooklyn, New York. Unfortunately, this is a noisy part of the country, so it won't be long. But the one thing I will say is because of international intellectual property laws, researchers and advocates do not have the ability to look at the source code to understand how these decisions are being made. So the passage of the Algorithmic Accountability Act will not only safeguard those of us from protected classes, but also give us insight into how these technologies make decisions that really have incredible impacts on the lives of many Americans. I look forward to the discussion. I thank you for the invitation, and I yield my time.
Thank you, Ms. Nkande. We have now concluded our witnesses' opening statements. At this time, we will move to member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions of our witnesses. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Since we have witnesses appearing virtually, I need to ask my colleagues in the hearing room to mute themselves whenever they are not directly speaking during their Q&A portion, so that we can clearly hear the witnesses' remarks. I will begin with my 5 minutes of questions. No, targeted advertising is at the heart of the online consumer model, online business model. but it fundamentally violates users' privacy in a way that would never be accepted if consumers were actually given the choice. That is why I joined Representative Eshoo in introducing the Banning Surveillance Advertising Act. And this legislation prohibits companies from targeting advertisement based on personal information. So, Ms. McInnes, your company already bans targeted advertising. Can you tell us why you made this decision?
Thank you for the question, Chairwoman. Our founder and CEO started out DuckDuckGo by wanting to serve users with great instant answers at the top of the search engine results page. And he was really looking for his company to have a positive impact. As he was developing his company in 2008, he saw that there was a clear need for private search engines. And so we developed privacy for the search engine, have been expanding our privacy options ever since. And thank you for noting that DuckDuckGo helps stem surveillance ads. We're working very hard to ensure that our users are protected as they do whatever they need to do online by blocking trackers in the first instance so that information is not collected about them.
And is your business still profitable without the use of targeted advertising?
Yes, we are very profitable. Our revenue is somewhere around $100 million per year. We have over 30 million US users in the United States, and they span the whole nation and the political spectrum.
Thank you. When you were asking whether people get frustrated when they see that there's an ad that pops up, you know, how did they know to target me? And people feel uncomfortable online because of that. In our last tech hearing, we discussed the impact of whistleblowers protection at the Federal Trade Commission. I'm so glad to see that provisions in Ms. Trahan's bill to protect whistleblowers similar to those in the FTC, in the FTC Whistleblower Act that she and I have introduced in November. So I wanted to ask Ms. Lehman, would consumers be better protected from online harm if the FTC whistleblowers were protected by federal law?
Thank you, Chair Schakowsky. Absolutely, yes. We're excited a number of the transparency provisions before us today. There is context that as many transparency reports as we have, as much nuance as we can get into, as much research as we do, there is context that you can only ever get when someone can tell you why a decision was made. And so for that reason, whistleblowers are critical to providing that context for consumers.
I really don't have any more questions except to say that we are going to move along as fast as we can to protect consumers from the harms that are out there, from the information that they don't want collected, and we want to do it in the bills that are introduced today that we're discussing, but also to move quickly and efficiently and very hopefully in a bipartisan way to do comprehensive privacy legislation. The time to regulate is now. The time to hold big tech accountable is now. We have heard over and over again the promises, the denials of wrongdoing that we have heard from big tech, and really enough is enough. Consumers want to be able to safely and confidently use what they can online and not be exploited as they have been. So I yield back. And now, well, Mr. Bilirakis for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it very much. Mr. Duffy, thank you again for your testimony. Again, we appreciate the valuable insights you bring to this discussion. I don't know if he can hear me, but Mr. Duffy, we were having a little difficulty hearing you before in your opening remarks. So hopefully we fixed that. I don't know, maybe you need to speak into the microphone. Your information is so valuable, so we want to catch everything. So anyway, I have a question for you. I'm gravely concerned about the crimes perpetrated on big tech platforms, such as the sale of deadly fentanyl on Snapchat. And I believe companies are not doing enough to help solve these crimes. I mean, enough is enough, as the chairman said. Again, we can't allow this to happen anymore. Kids are dying, for crying out loud. And so, in fact, in our subcommittee, the health subcommittee, we had, we had somebody testify on the fentanyl crisis in December. And Chairman Eshoo agreed with my assessment that big tech companies aren't doing enough to coordinate the DEA on drug sales in particular. Okay, that's why I recently introduced the Capture Act, which will help us to develop legislation to assist social media companies to better communicate with law enforcement, specifically in relation to events of imminent injury or death to individuals. So from your experience, sir, and I appreciate you testifying, again, you're doing a great job in our state. So from your experience, how has big tech failed at cooperating with law enforcement to assist in solving these dangerous crimes? And I'd like for you to elaborate, sir.
Thank you, Representative. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can. Madam Chair,
Okay.
can we hear better? Yeah, I think so. Thank you. I can. Thank you.
Okay. So they have failed in the sense that I don't think what we see is some of them they don't understand the trends that today's youth is communicating by on their platforms. The data retention, when we do open communication, is an issue as what they do and what they don't keep and for how long they keep it. The content moderation, they build, what we've seen is a lot of these companies build a platform for one type of use, and then as you explained, it gets used and abused for other areas. So I think the failure is the lack of communication and between big tech and law enforcement to discuss the trends, to discuss the acronyms and the use of emojis and the different codes by which today's youth communicate.
Yeah, sir, when you speak slower, we can hear a lot better. So let's try that. Yeah, and stay close to the mic. I really appreciate it. What more can big tech do, in your opinion, do you believe, again, this legislation that I filed, the Capture Act, can help accomplish this? And then also, as I mentioned in my testimony, we invited TikTok to testify at today's hearing to answer how they have failed to protect our youth online. They again ignored our requests. Okay, we're not going to give up. We're going to have them here, and they're going to have to answer our questions. I know the chair agrees with me. She's the leader in this area. It's clear they are not investing the time or resources needed to adequately curb dangerous content on their platform. Are you familiar with the dangerous viral changes that populate the site and how schools are scrambling to stay ahead of the harms to other students and teachers alike? If so, can you elaborate on how this has stretched the resources? And again, the teachers and the police officers, they can't do it all. They need our help. So it's stretched the resources for Florida police. I know if you can elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative. I agree with you 100%. The resources that we in law enforcement have for identification of these viral challenges is a lot of times brought to our attention by parents or school resources officers who are within the school system, who are listening to the kids, watching their activity, and hearing firsthand what's going on. As you mentioned, we don't have unlimited resources. We are left to prioritize the different types of leads which we can investigate properly, and then identify the ones that we can pursue.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I yield back, Madam Chair. Hopefully we can get this cleared up and straightened out, because I know a lot of the members here, at least on my side, want to talk to Mr. Duffy and get valuable information from him. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Yes, and now I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman. We're here today, as we know, to have an open, meaningful dialogue about solutions to address the harm social media companies have caused, and this is more timely than ever as we see social media companies expanding their reach. So I wanted to use Facebook as an example, which now goes by Meta. We've seen reports of sexual assault and harassment in the virtual reality world that Facebook is trying to create with the metaverse. So let me start with Ms. Nkonde. Can you expand on this issue? What are some of the real harms that we'll see as social media companies expand their reach, if you will?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Pallone. The issue, just to read everybody in to the issue with the metaverse as it stands, the head of research of the metaverse recently wrote a Medium article in which she told us that when she went in, she was sexually abused by male avatars. The issue is, in order to get this immersive experience, what Meta are currently doing, what her team is doing, are investigating how to use light sensors to make it feel like we're seeing, audio sensors to make it feel like we're hearing, and tactile sensors to make it feel like we are being touched. Therefore, if you go into an immersive environment where you really feel that these things are happening to you, then despite the fact that it's in a headset, you're still going to have that very real experience of abuse. And without regulation of what's called Web 2, what we know of Facebook, these harms are going to be perpetrated further in virtual environments.
And what about, well, let me ask about marginalized communities. How might they be impacted by these changes that we're seeing?
Marginalized communities are actually the most vulnerable within this. And so the head of metaverse research is a woman. She is a protected class. So what we were seeing in her attack by male avatars were really the logics of sexism and hatred of women being enforced in a place where you can reach your target. Another group that we're seeing more reports around are children in the metaverse, which is a whole explosion of issues, specifically because people under 13 are not even supposed to be on that platform. And so when we think about regulation, we need to think about the most vulnerable. Could a disabled avatar got away in those situations? There's a history of racial violence in this country. If we see attacks on women, it's logical that we're going to see attacks on negatively racialized groups. And it's committees like this and the bills that are being put forward that are really going to keep us American people safe.
Instances, I think increased transparency would go a long way in making the internet a safer place. So let me ask Ms. Lehman, how would the legislation before us today bring greater transparency and with it greater accountability to these big tech platforms, if you will?
Thank you, Chair Pallone. So the transparency in bills across the board today is a crucial prerequisite to really understanding and forming the kinds of harms we're seeing across the board. And being able to have that kind of context, being able to speak to the specific harms. And so the bills before us today, particularly Representative Clark and Representative Trahan's bills, are in requiring impact assessments, for example, and in requiring, it requires companies to actually take account for what kinds of harms, what kinds of risks do we need to consider, do we need to think about, rather than building first and asking questions later once the harms have happened. I'll go back.
I only have a little time left, but let me just say, we've consistently seen some social media companies withhold critical information about how their systems work from the public, which makes it difficult for consumer protection agencies like the FTC to address the issues users face online. Could you tell me, Ms. Lehman, how would these bills help the FTC better protect consumers from unfair or deceptive practices? But you only got 20 seconds.
Thank you, we'll try. The short answer is, it helps inform how we do it. 8 seconds, wait. It offers so much more perspective to the FTC to understand the problems and therefore to keep consumers safe in service of their mission. 3 seconds, okay. We'll try.
Maybe I made you go too fast. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back. Let me just remind everyone in the room, all members, to please unmute after you've spoken. Apparently, we're getting some feedback here. I'm
They
sorry?
have to mute their mics after this.
Yeah, to mute your mics after you've spoken. And now, I recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There certainly is a lot before us in this hearing, and I appreciate the attention. The Republicans also we have a couple of dozen bills around transparency and accountability. Clearly, there's action that needs to take place, and we've been working with a variety of stakeholders, getting input. I know that in committee, there's 35 bills that have received a legislative hearing in the subcommittee. 3 have been marked up, and 2 have received the bipartisan support. I really believe, and what I want to make the request of, is that we work together, that this is a problem that is going to require us seeking input and support from a lot of different entities, Republicans and Democrats. But beyond that, I believe that we need to be hearing from the advertising industry, AI developers, small businesses, even the FTC, for that matter, on how this is going to work, how they're going to operate after this, what you might call an extreme makeover FTC edition. And I fundamentally believe that we need to be addressing a privacy law. We need a national privacy framework in order to gird up what the whole space is right now. And so we have drafted legislation and are anxious to work with our colleagues across the aisle on a privacy standard. Certainly there's an opportunity to find some common ground. On some of the issues before us today, I wanted to start with Ms. McInnes. Given recent reports on big tech needing to do more to protect the people of Ukraine from the misinformation campaigns generated by the Kremlin and its still active Twitter account, I have a couple of questions to give you an opportunity to reflect on DuckDuckGo's part in this debate. Does your company still maintain a partnership with the Russian search engine Yandex?
In light of Russia's assault on democracy in Ukraine, we have paused our relationship with Yandex. Yandex was used to provide traditional links, meaning non-news links on the search engine results page in Russia and Turkey.
Thank you. Given you raise revenue via contextual advertising and affiliated programs, are you able to say whether such revenue has ever come from Russian state media sources in this partnership?
I do not know. Our advertisements are provided through Bing's contextual ads program, and so Microsoft's advertising would have the best information about that. That said, I think that they would be the best ones.
Okay, thank you. Do you, or how do you see we best address concerns that we have over Chinese-owned TikTok and how it may be influenced by Russia via its alliance with China?
Thank you, Ranking Member. Ranking Member Billirakis and Ranking Member Morris Rogers, you've talked extensively about the need to protect children online. Although we have the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, banning the use of surveillance ads would, I think, help protect children by banning the collection of personal information, no matter their age. which I think would help solve for some of the issues that we've been seeing online, where dominant tech companies say, we're not sure if children are on our platform. We don't actually know that they're there. And so if we're protecting everyone, we're protecting children more. In addition, I think having some privacy laws like the general one you mentioned, or the banning surveillance advertising bill, which of course would protect privacy, would stem the ability of platforms like TikTok to collect information regardless.
Okay, well, thank you, and I appreciate your engagement and your support on the legislation. Fundamentally, we need a privacy framework, and so we'll continue to work on that. Officer Duffy, our law enforcement officers are our American heroes, and I've personally heard some very sad tales of the role big tech played in tragic events impacting our children and the pressures on first responders. In your, you reference exigent circumstances and suicide intervention. Can you elaborate on the subjective constraints that social media platforms put on law enforcement to intervene in harm to children? And can you give us a sense which social media companies do a better job in cooperating?
Thank you, Representative Issues. But as it relates to exigent, when we serve a company with exigent circumstances, it's left at their determination. We present them with the facts as we are given, and ultimately, each individual company is the final say-so on whether they determine there is a threat to a person's life or others in that moment.
And which companies are cooperating?
It varies. The last one that I referenced in my statement was TikTok.
Okay, thank you. I've run out of time. Yield back.
Okay, who's next? My colleague from the Chicago area, Congressman Bobby Rush, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Madam Chairman, for this most magnificent hearing. My question is directed to Ms. Nkande. Ms. Nkande, you mentioned facial recognition in your testimony. The error-prone nature of facial recognition software, especially when it comes to identifying people of color and women, is extremely dangerous. In 2018, an ACLU study found that Amazon's facial recognition software closely matched 28 members of Congress, including me, with someone else's mugshot. We have seen the real-world impact of this when in June 2020, the New York Times reported on the case of Robert Julian Rorschach Williams of Michigan, who was arrested by Detroit police because he was misidentified by facial recognition software. Later, it was revealed that this software was used, quote, almost exclusively against Black people, end of quote, and was used even though the Detroit police chief estimated that it misidentified individuals 96% of the time. Clearly, this is a very serious problem with very, very serious and very real implications. Ms. Nkande, can you please speak to the role algorithms play in these kinds of situations? Does the solution to this problem currently exist? If so, what needs to be done to implement them? And if not, what do we need to do as members of Congress to address these problems?
Thank you for the question, Representative Rush. Big questions, but yes. So the way facial recognition works is through a computer engineering protocol called computer vision. The training data are pictures of people's faces, and then the algorithm will take a face graph. So it basically measures your face and what we call facial architecture, color of the skin, broadness of the nose, circumference of the eyes, for example. The issue within the Gender Shades report, which kind of undergirded this idea that facial recognition technology did not work in the Amazon, Microsoft, and IBM report, found that the training data was using that of white men, which meant that when those same systems were used to identify non-white people like Mr. Williams, who you mentioned, it misidentifies us. Therefore, one of the things that Congress could do immediately is really take the Algorithmic Accountability Act to markup, because through impact assessments, the FTC would be then able to figure out what is the efficacy of this technology? Is it recognizing Black and brown people? Where is facial recognition being used? Because many Americans believe it's just in law enforcement, but they don't realize that when we use self-checkout, for example, in pharmacies, they're using facial recognition to figure out whether you've stolen toothpaste or not, whether
Mr. Conde, can you also include how it affects African Americans in the area of criminal justice and banking?
Yes, in the area of criminal justice, misidentification leads to incarceration or arrest. And in the area of banking or tax or finances, the IRS has just been stopped from using facial recognition for us to access our records. And if you imagine that African Americans are not being recognized, that would bar us from access to our own financial information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. Mr. Upton, you are recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to echo the remarks of Kathy McMorris Rogers. I hope that we can develop a privacy standard. It's something that's bipartisan. It's long overdue. I know it's tough to do, but I think we need to proceed down that road. For me, I'm a dad, and I'm also a granddad, so I sort of like that duck, duck, goose analogy at the beginning. I know where you were coming from, I think. But all of us want to protect the most vulnerable, and that's our kids and our grandkids. We want to make sure that there's every tool in that toolbox so that we know what's going on and their lives can be protected, because it's no longer just don't talk to strangers. There's a lot of strangers that are out there, and that's why we need to make sure that those tools are there. And so, Mr. Duffy, I want to thank you for your service, for coming before this committee to help us understand the ins and outs of protecting our nation's kids online. One of the concerns that I hear about most from my constituents, and there's a lot of them, is the way that big tech is impacting the mental health of our kids. So I just wonder if you can walk us through a step-by-step of how you interact with a tech company, and how does that change when there is a threat to a child that's viewed as urgent. And I would just recommend that you get as close to your mic as you can, because despite this being the high-tech committee, the connection's not all that great.
Thank you, Representative. I'm getting as close as I can, so hopefully this audio sounds a little bit better.
I knew it wasn't the Florida accent. I can understand that better than Louisiana.
Thank you. So really that relationship with big technology is only engaged upon an incident occurring. In the case of a missing child, or the case of child sexual abuse material, or a threat of violence, or an act of harm, we begin that engagement with technology. Outside of that, other than some of the big technology companies, the startups and a lot of the newer companies, we have very little engagement with them. Typically, our engagement when it begins is through legal process as we begin to try to investigate the issue at hand.
What's the volume the number of cases that your department looks at every year? And has it been increasing? What's been the trend line?
It has been increasing, specifically as it relates to the child sexual abuse material. We here in the state of Florida alone, law enforcement as a whole in the state of Florida has received over 18,000 leads reported to us by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children alone in 2020. That means law enforcement has to put eyes on each one of those leads to determine the ability to investigate those with limited resources.
And where was that number? Where were you, say, 10 years ago, or when you started? I know you've been with law enforcement for a while, but as I hear from my law enforcement folks, I mean, they shake their head in terms of some of the doors that get opened and some of the nasty stuff that really gets out there. How has that changed from when you started?
Exactly. When I started, it was a lot of what the work we did now was through the U.S. Postal Service, because the online world didn't exist. And the online world that existed was not as widely popular as it is today. So we are seeing exponential increases as companies come online and today's youth and others begin to leverage this platform to communicate, which ultimately results in children being sexually abused online, sextorted, and impact their mental health.
Can you tell us one particular story of where things worked out?
There's been a few where we've gotten instances of somebody saying, I'm watching a child being sexually abused, or a child was abducted, and through the use of technology, we were able to work with the provider to determine a location where that child or individual might be. And through the use of technology, we were able to locate that individual to prevent further abuse or recover the missing child.
And are you able to interact that with Amber Alert?
We very much so are.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you for your service. Appreciate the hearing. I yield back.
I wanted to point out that there was much more clarity with the response of our online witness, because you turned off your mic each time after you asked the question. And I would recommend that for everyone who is asking questions of our online witnesses. Next, Ms. Castor, I recognize you for 5 minutes for questions.
Well, thank you, Chair Schakowsky, for holding this hearing, and thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing today. And a special shout out to Special Agent Mike Duffy from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Thank you, Special Agent Duffy, for your 25 years of service, and especially on behalf of crimes against children, online harm. The subcommittee has now held several hearings on legislation to hold big tech accountable. And the bills before us today by Rep. Trahan and Rep. Eshoo and Rep. Clark are steps in the right direction. But I believe it is urgent that we move legislation on online privacy issues, especially when it comes to children. Passing a core comprehensive privacy bill is central to holding big tech accountable. And if we can adopt safeguards on processing personal information, tech platforms will have less of an incentive to use many of their manipulative and harmful techniques that are currently deployed to increase engagement and addict their users, many of which we've discussed in past hearings. So one of our witness companies today, DuckDuckGo, is a good example of this principle. And with the online harm to kids being made plain over the past few years, I've been working for a number of years to develop the Kids Privacy Act, to provide parents the necessary tools to protect their children, strengthen enforcement so companies are held to account for improperly collecting children's personal data and for misuse of that data. It also closes loopholes. The bill has widespread support. It's been endorsed by the leading child protection organizations, parents, pediatricians, and privacy groups. So to my Republican friends, we really need bipartisan support on this effort. The UK is ahead of us, the EU is ahead of us, and even the United States Senate, they're ahead of the House when it comes to children's online privacy. There are now 2 bipartisan bills over there, and while we all know that the Senate is not known for action, they are ahead of us here. So if they can come up with a bipartisan bill, so can we. So I'm really speaking out more as a mother than as a member of Congress. I've reached out to the leadership, and I'm doing so again because I'm not going to give up. My door is open to any member of Congress who wants to enter into good faith negotiations over a bill that protects children's privacy, their safety, and their health online, especially in the face of everything that we know now about crimes against kids, the rising rates of mental health problems, and more. I mean, the Facebook whistleblower was here, also made plain that the big tech platforms, Facebook, Instagram, they know about the harms, but they're more interested in getting kids hooked and their profits than keeping kids safe online. So thank you for indulging me on that, but please, my door is open and we really want to protect kids. So my question for the witnesses today, each one of you, yes or no, is a comprehensive federal privacy law a critical component of big tech accountability and protecting consumers online? Ms. Lehman, you can start.
Yes.
Ms. McGinnis.
Absolutely.
Special Agent Duffy.
Yes.
And Ms. Conde.
Yes.
And here's another yes or no. Should there be a special focus on protecting children's privacy, safety, and health online? Yes or no?
Yes.
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 Well, thank you. And Special Agent Duffy, you, Representative Upton asked you about a good news story, but tell us what you're seeing right now because of the the widespread collection of data on children and their interaction with online apps. What tools do parents need? What do parents tell you right now that they feel they need from policymakers here in Washington? Special Agent Duffy, your audio.
Sorry about that. Representative, thank you. Being a parent myself and talking with other parents, the biggest issue we hear is that they don't understand how to implement parental controls. A lot of these companies implement the process, but the explanation of how to do it is not clear.
Thank you very much. It's obvious that we need to rebalance the power here and put the power in the hands of parents and not these big tech platforms. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Latta, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I thank my friend the chair for today's hearing, and I also thank our witnesses for appearing before us today. As part of the Republican Big Tech Accountability Platform, many of the members in this body have proposed a number of reforms to the laws governing big tech. My proposal removes Section 230 liability protections from companies that act as bad Samaritans and knowingly promote, solicit, or facilitate illegal activity. Broadly, I have serious concerns about some of the activities that these companies are allowing to occur on their platforms, whether it is explicitly permitting these questionable activities or simply ignoring any illegal content that they discover. I believe legislation for us today misses the mark. H.R. 6796 would create a new bureau at the Federal Trade Commission with new rulemaking and investigatory authorities to define the code of conduct for online platforms. However, I do not believe it is the FTC's duty or responsibility to be the moderators of content on social media platforms. Rather, they should act as the clearinghouse to inform consumers on big tech's content moderation practices, including their enforcement decisions and appeals decisions. Additionally, the legislation required the FTC to hire 500 staffers. I can only imagine this undertaking would set back the FTC many years and further slow its rulemaking drafting process and its ability to protect consumers. Sadly, we aren't able to explore these concerns as the majority did not invite the FTC to testify today. Fortunately, we do have the opportunity to hear from Mr. Duffy, a career law enforcer who has dedicated his career to protecting Americans from predators in the rural world and is now working to protect Americans, especially children, from predators online. And Mr. Duffy, if I could begin my questions with you. In your testimony, it sounds like there are many instances of you being reliant on the goodwill of these tech companies to fully complete your law enforcement investigations. Would you speak about your conversations with these companies and how would you characterize their concern for what's happening on their platforms?
Thank you, Representative. With regards to your question, the conversation is sometimes with the newer tech companies is at a loss. And what I mean by that is they don't understand the pure volume of data which they have, which makes it a challenge for us in law enforcement to ask for the specific information that we are referring to. Specifically, when we talk about what we'll call the word game, when we begin to do our investigation, we serve each and every company with a legal process asking for specific content. If that content language that we're asking for doesn't match up with the exact language that they have, we begin this banter back and forth to try to identify the exact content we're looking for, which transparency in what they have would be greatly enhance our abilities to streamline some of our process.
Well, one of the ways we can hold big tech accountable is to increase that transparency requirement. So you're just talking about transparency. Last year, I released a discussion draft that required companies to disclose their content enforcement decisions related to child pornography, child trafficking, cyberbullying, illegal sale of drugs, foreign terrorism content, counterfeit products, revenge porn, and doxing. Do you believe that if law enforcement had more information about how companies manage or conduct enforcement against these types of activities, would it help you overall perform your job?
Yes, I believe it would. It would allow us to have a full understanding. I think it would open that door and have the conversations with these tech companies that sometimes stand to the side. Having a better understanding by law enforcement would be a win for all.
Well, thank you very much. And Madam Chair, before I yield back, I do have a letter to for the committee from ANA, which I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. And I yield back.
Congresswoman Trahan, you are next. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Throughout our country's history, bold reforms have been born in moments of crisis. The Great Depression forced Congress to create the Securities and Exchange Commission, tasked with overseeing and regulating the market to protect investors. And almost 80 years later, Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Act in response to the 2008 financial crisis, strengthening consumer protections against financial market abuse, and creating transparency and accountability requirements for the entire financial system. Yet today, crisis after crisis created by large technology platforms have resulted in minimal federal response. In fact, crickets. Under the leadership of Republican and Democratic-controlled governments alike, a handful of U.S. companies have become monopolies. They've optimized their platforms solely for ad revenue, and in turn, they've become breeding grounds for the spread of weaponized disinformation, hate speech, and content that harms our children. These issues have been closely examined. We've held hearings with experts. We've yelled at executives, and we've sent letters all saying the same thing: do better. Yet the end result has remained the same. Nothing changes, and company stock prices hit new highs. The focus of today's hearing may be on the legislative proposals introduced by myself and my colleagues, but the question is much simpler. How long can we continue this inaction? How long can we look at our children and say that change is necessary, but we just haven't been able to enact it yet? Congress has gotten off the sidelines in the past. For practically every other industry, cars, airplanes, and banks, we employ key organizations that keep pace with new developments and inform regulations aimed to protect consumers. We must get off the sidelines once again. Enough listening to companies saying, trust us, we have a process for that. Enough internal bickering that ends any real chance of progress, and enough watching Europe go first, and the Senate. I commend my colleagues on the committee, including our panel's leadership, who recognize that we have everything we need to act: the smoking guns, the historical precedent, and the legislative text. All we need today is the willpower. So, Ms. Lehman, the Digital Services Oversight and Safety Act creates a bureau at the FTC staffed with experts employed to issue rules related to public-facing transparency reports, certified researchers with data access, and disclosures to the Commission, so that we can shine sunlight on how consumer data is collected and used. Could you please explain why transparency requirements like these are so important?
Absolutely, thank you. Transparency requirements, particularly like those in your bill, we have a variety of them, right? So we have users and advertisers and individuals who need to understand what values the platforms that they use operate on. So that parents can decide, are these platforms' values coherent with what I want my kids to be on? Some of the most exciting components of the bill really are that we've seen time and time again, there is an allergy from the platforms to transparency and to accountability, whether that's Facebook disabling CrowdTangle or disbanding the CrowdTangle team, whether that's we've seen the list. And so having access to understand, okay, what kinds of misinformation, how does it spread, how can we fix these problems? We don't have the context for that right now, and the parts of the bill that shine that sunlight make that possible.
Well, thank you. And in your experience, how quickly do social media companies change their products and processes? And why is it so important to have a bureau that is flexible and nimble enough to quickly publish safety guidelines or issue new rules for disclosures?
Yeah, I think particularly for, in this space, things can change instantaneously. I think we've heard a little bit today about the metaverse and about like what Web3 and AR and VR might look like. If we think back to 5 or 6 years ago, which is kind of a long time and sometimes in legislative land, right? How could thinking through live video and the advent of live video was fairly revolutionary, and the fact that live video was happening on phones, and how did that change, and what kinds, as we heard from Mr. Duffy earlier, what kinds of harms can come from live video. Those are the kinds of things we need to be able to pivot instantaneously on, and that we can't wait for.
I couldn't agree more. Certainly, there is so much in the black box that we need to shine a light on so that we can keep up, not just the Congress, the FTC. I mean, if not them, who is going to be armed with transparency in this regard? The last thing, I know I'm out of time, but I would like to request unanimous consent to enter a report from the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights entitled Enhancing the FTC's Consumer Protection Authority to Regulate Social Media Companies.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So ordered. Okay. Mr. Guthrie, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a letter from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It has been submitted to your staff that I would like to ask to enter into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. And thanks, everybody, for being here today. And my questions are for Mike Duffy. And the United States has seen historic levels of opioid abuse, leading to tragic deaths over the last several years. According to the Kentucky Office of Drug Control Policy, illicit fentanyl and its analogs were detected in more than 70% of all cases in Kentucky in 2020. The opioid crisis has been exacerbated by deadly fentanyl being trafficked into our communities through our southern border and on the social media platform millions of Americans, including our children, are using. The Energy and Commerce Committee has passed several bills to address this epidemic. One bill, I know it's in a different subcommittee, a subcommittee I have the honor of being ranking member, but the Halt Fentanyl Act. I mean, the idea that March 11th, after the CR expires, that illicit fentanyl will be street legal in America is just wrong. I wish we could make it permanently illegal. I do expect and hope that we can work together to at least extend it moving forward. But it's just absolutely frustrating that we can't permanently schedule illicit fentanyl. That's 70% of Kentuckians who died of an overdose died of illicit fentanyl in 2020. But I'm also concerned that, and where it ties into this hearing, that illegal drugs are still available online through illegal pharmacies and even these widely popular social media platforms. This type of illegal activity online is troubling and inexcusable. I'm working on a draft legislation as part of the Republican Big Tech platform that would help prevent this from happening on these sites by requiring internet platforms to implement and maintain reasonable content moderation policies and practices to address the illegal sale of drugs on their platforms. Additionally, the Federal Trade Commission and states' attorneys general would ensure enforcement of these policies. So my question is for Mr. Duffy. In your testimony, you discussed the challenges that tech platforms present to law enforcement. Do you find that most platforms have formal process or framework by which to work with law enforcement personnel? And do you think legislation in this space will enhance law enforcement's capabilities to track this illegal activity and facilitate? So what is the current status of these platforms, and what would you like to see Congress do? Mr.
Unmute, that'll help the, we can hear him better if you unmute. There we go.
All right, thank you, Representative. I do believe that any type of framework would be to our advantage and a win for all. Right now, as the companies begin, I personally, and how they struggle to use by the general population, it becomes popular and then gets misused. And them addressing and having some framework and requirements as to having a group that is able to handle the volume of law enforcement compliance legal process that we serve, and mandating that they build out these groups to respond to our responses will not only help law enforcement investigative efforts. The other side of it is if these big tech corporations enact encryption, then we are back to not being able to investigate an opioid case where an individual has overdosed, and now we can't get into that mobile device to identify, nor do we have the tools to try to get into this device to determine who that person was communicating with to potentially stop others from getting this drug and work a criminal investigation. So having these companies be held accountable to creating a outreach or law enforcement response compliance group. Secondly, allowing law enforcement to have the tools needed to help fight encryption. And I'm not indicating that we're not asking for anything that we aren't entitled to with proper legal process. We can't get into these locked devices. The person who overdosed, the child who overdosed on the ground there, we can't identify where the suspect may be.
Well, thank you, and I just have 20 seconds, so I will yield back. I can't have time for another question, so I'll yield back my time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back, and next is Mr. McNerney for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair, and I thank the gentleman from Kentucky for yielding early. I thank the witnesses. Your testimony is very compelling this morning. Ms. McGinnis, please describe for a minute or so how banning surveillance ads would transform the online ecosystem.
Absolutely, and thank you for the question, Representative. Right now, Facebook and Google control an ad duopoly in online advertising sales because they have convinced the advertising market and advertisers that behavioral ads are more relevant and serve users with more targeted ads than others would. There's no reason, however, why contextual advertisements should not and could not be just as relevant as behavioral ads. DuckDuckGo has used contextual ads for our entire existence to show users relevant offers in the moment. We think that, while you're searching for sneakers, you're likely wanting to see ads about sneakers and not an ad for a vacation you might have taken a few months ago. In addition, if this bill was enacted, many companies would be prevented from the collection of online data, meaning that their duopoly, Facebook and Google's duopoly and ads, would be diminished. Companies would be able to compete against them more forcefully in the market, and we would have more innovative contextual advertisement services for users, and therefore the ads would be more relevant and more useful to users in the future.
Thank you. And that was just a little more than a minute. Ms. Lehman, you argue that if companies are truly proud of how effectively they protect consumers, we would expect them to welcome independent investigators or researchers. Unfortunately, that's not happening, which is why a comprehensive approach to transparency created in the Digital Services Oversight and Safety Act, HR 6796, is so important. So please explain how increased transparency from this legislation would result in concrete changes.
Thank you for the question. So where platforms fail to take responsibility, transparency can flag issues, and they can flag the extent of the issues and how those issues persist. The kinds of issues we've talked about today a little bit, we've talked about misinformation, we've talked about discriminatory advertising, we've talked about targeting ads to children, and targeting ads to minors, and there's a CR article last year about targeting, I want to say, gambling and alcohol ads toward minors. This is the kind of thing that without transparency, we don't have a good sense of the scale of the problem and how best to combat it. With Representative Trahan's bill, we suddenly have the ability to make clear where the problems are coming from and how they can best be stemmed.
I forgot to say that I'm going to switch to DuckDuckGo tonight. Thank you. Ms. Lehman, in your written testimony, states that algorithms can be opaque, and even for the engineers that design them. I've designed algorithms. I know what you're talking about. How can Algorithm Accountability Act help engineers be more thoughtful about their designs and testing processes?
Thank you. So with the Algorithm Accountability Act, it allows for, it makes possible impact assessments. And so it forces, again, the consideration that platforms and companies utilizing algorithms don't presently need to do. And so, because there are so many different factors that can go into algorithmic recommendations or algorithmic decision-making, it forces considerations and not changes, and not, but that it's kind of a form of transparency unto itself, but forcing that forward is a crucial component of understanding what factors go into things that can affect everything from credit to housing to what ads we're seeing online.
Well, in other words, pre-planning and pre-specifications can help make algorithms more accountable and transparent.
Yes, and fair. Yes.
Believe that. Ms. Nkande, in your testimony, you explained how predictions made through machine learning create a feedback loop that can change the course of society. Please elaborate on that. That's an interesting comment.
So once a prediction has been made, for example, a wrongful arrest, in the case of Robert Williams, as we talked about earlier, that person now has a false arrest record, but more importantly, their biometric data is within that system, and there's no way of taking back that bad decision-making. So that person's life has been changed, not just personally, but administratively, and they become part of a data set that's feeding back wrong information.
Thank you. I've run out of time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and yes, next is Mr. Bouchon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for calling this hearing today. This is a really, really important subject. In the last few years, multiple reports and incidents have come out showing that America's youth has been harmed by the often opaque and insufficient data privacy and content moderation practices of tech platforms and other online services. I think we can all agree that that's true. It's extremely concerning. I have 4 children. My youngest now, my daughter, is getting ready to graduate high school, and during her high school years, we've had to navigate this. And in our family, just like everyone else's, like so many other people from Indiana and Hoosiers, they've had to grapple with what the fair and safe terms of her online presence is with this in mind, because If anyone has teenagers, they know they will be online, whether you know it or not. It is critical that kids like my daughter learn to safely navigate these technologies to prepare them for the 21st century life and workplace. I was a surgeon before, and I always like to say these issues need to be addressed, I think, with a scalpel rather than a hacksaw, and that there are data and usage restrictions worthy of examination by this committee, absolutely. Fortunately, I think the legislation today, which is extremely well-intended, probably takes more of a hacksaw approach than I'd like to see. Outright banning targeted advertising and opening a private right of action to let trial lawyers sue small businesses and local advertisers I don't think, addresses the issue. Rather, we should examine policies, how the FTC can better do their job as the cop on the beat to protect children from privacy dangers online. We're also reviewing a bill today that would drastically expand the government to increase the FTC by nearly 1/3 of its existing size. So, Mr. Duffy, in your testimony, you mentioned some of the ways that predators and other bad actors try to pressure and bully kids into providing information or materials that can harm them for the rest of their lives by putting it in cyberspace, and that never goes away. Do you believe that requiring platforms to be more transparent with their cyberbullying content moderation practices would empower youth users and their parents to avoid, oppose, or remove cyberbullying content that can quickly get out of hand and turn into exploitative or even illegal content?
I do. Thank you, Representative. I agree with you 100% that some transparency with youth, law enforcement, and parents would only add to the knowledge base for everybody on how to better protect yourself, the content and what you're giving, what you are contributing when you sign up for these sites. And it would allow for us to have a wider scope as to the overall issue when it comes to sextortion and cyberbullying, along with the tactics used by these individuals.
Well, thank you very much. And even I live in Evansville, Indiana, and I can tell you, talking with local law enforcement there, this is pervasive. It's surprising. Even in rural counties I represent, bad actors every day doing this. This is just not, in cities, big cities and other places. This is everywhere. Ms. McGinnis, many consumers have already shown to be interested in not having their data tracked, as evidenced by the success of DuckDuckGo browser. But there are obviously those who have chosen to stay on the platforms that use their data. Do you think that encouraging wider implementation of privacy by design principles would give consumers the confidence that their data is being responsibly used and could encourage more transparent practices in how a company uses a consumer's data to alleviate the concerns and abuses you have laid out by some of the advertisers currently?
Thank you, Representative. Absolutely. However, as the chairwoman and ranking member have stated, we've waited too long for companies to self-regulate, and we really should act now to incentivize them to act in the best interests of their users.
Yeah, so what you're saying is wider implementation of privacy by design principles should be driven by change in federal law.
Unfortunately,
not voluntary.
Unfortunately, sir, I just think that companies won't be incentivized to do so before we incentivize them with law. In addition, I think competition reform bills would level the playing field, allowing more companies like DuckDuckGo to compete on privacy.
It's a good advertisement. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Relevant to this subcommittee, the president is apparently going to talk about social media and children's mental health tonight, which is very important to us. Yeah. Next we have my friend Congresswoman Clark for 5 minutes.
And thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member Bilrakis, for holding this extremely important hearing today. And I'd like to thank you for including my legislation, HR 6580, the Algorithmic Accountability Act of 2022, which I recently reintroduced along with Senators Ron Wyden and Senator Cory Booker. My legislation takes common sense and long overdue measures to protect consumers from harmful bias and discrimination resulting from the widespread use of automated systems that are governed by computer algorithms, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Let me be clear. The problem isn't just Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. The problem is pervasive. The very same automated technologies that are being misused and abused by social media companies are similarly being used without oversight by a wide range of industries to make critical split-second decisions about people's health care, housing, finances, employment, and so much more. And while these technologies reach conclusions based on calculations, these calculations are the products of systems designed by humans, subjecting them to a wide range of flaws that reinforce broader societal discrimination, particularly against women and people of color. So, Ms. Nkande, and it's so good to see you once again. Could you share an example or two of algorithmic systems leading to discriminatory outcomes that have a major impact on people's lives?
Yes, of course, Congresswoman Clark. One of the most recent examples is a pain management algorithm that's used in over 1,000 healthcare settings in the United States that was discriminating against Black American patients because their healthcare costs were higher in aggregate than other groups. And it wasn't because of care. I can certainly speak about that more, but I know we don't have time. And then the second example was one that was brought forth by the Haas Business School at Berkeley that found that mortgage recommendation algorithms were discriminating against Black borrowers at the same rates as human beings because the inputs that were being used, the questions that were being asked were as discriminatory as it were, a human banker. So those are two of a myriad of examples I could offer.
So thank you. It's clear to me that something must be done to address the current lack of accountability and transparency around how automated systems are being used. And that's why my Algorithmic Accountability Act directs companies to assess their automated decision systems for potentially dangerous flaws such as inherent bias, safety risk, and performance gaps. Ms. Nkunde, would you agree that impact assessments are a feasible and important first step in tackling this issue?
Yes, as it's been said earlier in this hearing, we're looking at impact assessments around algorithmic thinkers in the EU, and understanding the downstream impact of these technologies will enable good faith actors on the public side to be able to decide whether this is actually in line with existing law. Because the harms I'm describing are otherwise outlawed underneath civil rights statute, which we should be following if we are going to follow rule of law in this country.
And Ms. Lena, do you agree as well? And how would these impacts assessments benefit consumers?
Thank you, Congresswoman. A little bit, as we mentioned earlier, having companies have to consider things other than their profits, having them have to consider how the systems they build have impacts on communities, on marginalized communities, on consumers across the board, inherently, even if it may provide more internal accountability and it may provide more external accountability as well, but it forces those considerations in a way that we haven't previously seen.
Well, thank you. And my legislation would further direct companies to report their findings to the FTC for review and require the FTC to establish a public repository of automated decision systems, along with high-level information such as data sources and how to contest decisions. Ms. Nkunde, how would these transparency measures be helpful to consumers and researchers alike?
They would protect our rights and enable us to make informed decisions around what we're actually buying and the impact it will have on our lives as on a whole.
Well, let me thank you for your testimony here today to all of our witnesses. It's time that we make a change. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back. I've gone over.
The gentlelady yields back, and now, Mr. Dunn, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss big tech today. You know, thanks to advancements in technology, it's easier than ever to stay connected online. When the world went into a lockdown with COVID, our relationships could nominally be continued, and of course, essential businesses remained open. So social media with American big tech leading the way certainly was a boon to us, and we should absolutely continue to uphold an economic system that allows for innovation and open competition in the U.S. technological industry, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises that are trying to break into the market. Unfortunately, social media platforms have also provided a new space for bad actors, foreign adversaries to exploit the social media channels to target potential victims and, of course, spread harmful propaganda. And these threats are heightened during a crisis like we're seeing now in Europe. Some of the Twitter accounts that were sharing information about Russian unprovoked attack in Ukraine were curiously suspended from Twitter during the beginning days of the invasion. Twitter has noted that these accounts were removed by mistake, not due to Russian interference. And while this may not be an example of pure Russian aggression, we know similar reports will likely increase, and TikTok is already reporting a surge in Russian propaganda. The dangers of foreign adversaries using social media to advance their agenda is clearly a very real danger. Social media companies have a social responsibility to not allow malign state influences on their websites. And I think our national security depends on that. So first question, Ms. McInnes. We know China uses search engines to push conspiracy theories, and we know Russia is currently using propaganda online to spread misleading information in Ukraine. How does DuckDuckGo detect foreign manipulation campaigns such as this? And after detection, what steps do you take?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. First and foremost, the number one thing that DuckDuckGo does to help stem disinformation and misinformation online is not collect your personal information. Companies that collect a lot of personal information, such as Google, are able to use that to further ensure that you're engaging in the product, which leads often to the presentation of conspiracy theories or other fringe videos that are presenting non-credible information. Secondly, DuckDuckGo got started as a search engine that was providing users with instant answers at the top of the search engine results page. We've continued to do that, especially with regards to information that may be targeted by people with ill intentions to provide misinformation and disinformation. And what many may not know is that the top of the search engine results page gets by far the most attention from any user. So by presenting users with credible and authoritative information at the top, we're ensuring that they're going to find the right answers to their questions and not be steered away to another site that's looking to prey on their fear and misinformation.
Thank you for that, Ms. McInnes. Again, our adversaries also want access to individuals' data so they can build algorithms to target, predict, and manipulate behavior in the United States. I'm especially concerned about American companies that have ties to Communist Chinese Party and what data they are forced to share because of that relationship with China. You know, I think consumers deserve more transparency. How is their data used? Can you tell us a little bit more about that data? What are they forced to share?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I'm not sure what data companies are forced to share, in part because DuckDuckGo does not collect any personal user data as people use our systems.
Well,
So
thank you for not doing that. I appreciate. Where time's drawing short, so I'm going to ask you for yes or no answers to these, if you will. Do you believe that the amount of individual data collected by big tech companies is concerning?
Very.
Good. In general, is the data collected by big tech companies used to influence individual behaviors?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Mr. Duffy, we're going to give your technology another shot here. From your experience, what tools could social media sites implement to help users identify nefarious accounts? Shouldn't have taken the risk, I guess. Why don't you try that, Ms. McGinnis? You go ahead. Oh, there he is.
Did they select
Mr. Duffy, go ahead. What tools would you wish you had from Congress? A good computer, an audio connection. Pardon? I appreciate the chair's forbearance. I yield back.
Yeah, I think we unfortunately lost him. Next is Mr. Cardenas for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman Zhikowski, and also Ranking Member Bilirakis for having this important meeting and talking about these very good bills. I'd also like to thank my colleague, Representative Lori Trahan, for introducing her bill, which would help shine a light on the content moderation practices of big tech companies. Without adequate transparency, we don't have the information we need to understand how disinformation spreads and how to hold these companies accountable when they fail to make strong enough measures to combat it. This problem is particularly bad in Spanish-speaking communities, where we have seen social media companies fail to invest the resources necessary to fight Spanish language disinformation. And it's come to my attention that Russia is feeding disinformation about what's going on in the Ukraine, specifically bombarding the Spanish-speaking community here in the United States and around the world. So obviously they're trying to skew the truth and trying to get certain communities to believe that Putin is muy bueno, or a good guy, and he's not. Thanks to whistleblowers like Frances Haugen, a former Facebook product manager, we know that Facebook directed 87% of their investments on combating misinformation to English language content, in spite of that fact that only 9% of Facebook users are English speakers. What a disparity. These disparities are unacceptable, especially when consuming misinformation can lead to real world health, safety, and financial consequences for communities. And also, in some cases, people are actually dying based on what people are fed and the actions that they take. Ms. Lehman, would publicly publishing how these online platforms moderate non-English language content hopefully put some pressure on companies to correct the disparities in content moderation investment between English content and content in other languages? And if so, how so?
Absolutely. And I think in large part because those disparities, when they're said aloud, are so dramatic and so disproportionate and so just incredibly disheartening, right? As the statistic you just cited, if it's 87%, even though it's only making up 9%, even though English speakers make up only 9% of that platform, all languages deserve the level of attention and the intensity and the appropriate content moderation, because all consumers deserve high standards of content moderation, and that when they're using a platform online, they can expect that their experience will not be different from someone else's simply because of the language that they're using on that platform.
Thank you. We had Facebook in front of us and other companies, and they admitted that they could put some more resources in there, but they choose not to. For example, Ms. McGinnis, wasn't it earlier today that somebody asked about whether or not DuckDuckGo is actually profitable? And you said yes. What number did you say that your revenue is $100 million?
That's correct, Representative.
Is that per year?
It's per year.
In an annual basis? A year. Well, I would venture to guess that $100 million is a slow day for Facebook/Meta, Google, and Amazon. So I pray that DuckDuckGo can actually continue to succeed in this environment, because we're talking about companies that are now net worth $1 trillion or more. And the reason why I point that out is because they choose not to use good practices. They choose not to have practices that are respective of the consumer, respectful of the people who are using their platforms. And so I just want to commend you, Ms. McGinnis, and please tell the C-suite executives at DuckDuckGo that I hope and pray that your model continues to work in this environment. And unfortunately, you are a tiny player on this playing field. Please take a second if you think that I'm mischaracterizing what I just said.
No, I appreciate your words, Representative, and we're trying very hard to compete in this marketplace, but as we've mentioned, Facebook and Google hold a duopoly in advertising, and the Banning Surveillance Advertising Act would help mediate that inadequacy in the market and allow for more companies to compete on privacy, just like DuckDuckGo.
Thank you so much. In 2020, a product risk assessment calculated internally by Facebook found that Spanish language misinformation detection on the platform remains, quote, very low performance. In spite of that, the report's recommendation was to, and I quote, just keep trying to improve, and claimed that, and I quote, addition of resources will not help. That nothing could be further from the truth. And the last thing I'll say is, without public accountability, I think that these companies will continue to do the wrong thing, and we do need to have federal legislation to rein them in for the sake of people's health and livelihood, and for the lives of the people and the children who are badly affected by these platforms. I'm sorry I went over my time, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back.
No, I thank the gentleman. And Ms. Lesko, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Before I begin my question, I want to correct the record. Earlier in the hearing, Representative Castor had urged the need for the House to have a bipartisan bill updating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Rule. And I agree, we need a bipartisan bill, but such a bill already exists. Representative Wahlberg and Representative Rush introduced H.R. 1781, the Protect Kids Act, earlier this year, and I understand Republicans have requested this bill to be included in the last 2 legislative hearings, but still to no avail. Furthermore, the bill was reintroduced from last year, so I'm happy to say to Representative Castor that the Senate is not ahead of us on this particular issue. I also want to add that I understand that Leader McMorris Rodgers and Ranking Member Wicker have now asked the President twice on engaging on a comprehensive national privacy and data security bill, not just on children's privacy, and have not heard back yet, or there hasn't been an attempt to build a consensus with us Republicans. So I think we do want to work in a bipartisan area because this is very important. Well, again, I want to say thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Before I begin my questions, I want to express my disappointment that representatives from the advertising industry were not invited to testify at a hearing which examines legislation that will severely impact the advertising industry. It seems that they deserve a seat at the table so we can understand the effects. I do want to be clear, however, I have the same concerns that my colleagues have in terms of big tech abusing their power and escaping responsibilities for their wrongdoing. However, H.R. 6416 will burden the small and medium-sized enterprises that are looking to gain entry into a market that heavily relies on advertising to be successful. The niche products created by innovators looking to capitalize on the American dream will not be able to grow or even survive under this legislation. I do not believe that was the intent of the sponsor, my friend. I know you care about protecting Americans' privacies, but let's not do it at the expense of small businesses. Yes, abusers like Google must be held accountable, but we must be sure to examine that actions taken to curb big tech's power will not unduly burden small businesses. The FTC has shown no interest in protecting good actors in the market, so that duty now falls on us. But these are the very same concerns that the Interactive Advertising Bureau, an organization that should be on today's panel, explained in a letter to this committee. And I ask that this letter, it's probably a lengthy one, be submitted for the record. And if Mr. Duffy can hear us.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Duffy, thank you again for your testimony and for your long career. Wearing the badge, you raised many issues that we should be examining as we hold big tech accountable. Central to our goal is the Federal Trade Commission and their ability to inform Americans about resources they have when their security has been violated. As a law enforcement expert, what information would you want people to know about when their safety is violated on social media platforms?
Thank you, Representative. Hopefully the audio is coming through a little bit clearer. To answer your question, I think today you would want to know, and your safety is violated, what exactly is the data that was available to that individual? Was it personal information as it relates to your phone number? Was it date of birth information? A lot of times when we see these social media sites, there is a growing concern amongst individuals that they are being encouraged to link their profiles to other social media sites. The question then becomes is what data carries from company to company, and how does that impact the citizens that we serve every day? So I think while a lot of it is we're used to credit reports being offered to people once they've been compromised, from a social media perspective, were my pictures taken? The big picture of what exactly was compromised, so that I can make a self-assessment as a citizen to what safety factors I'm more concerned of.
Thank you, and Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. And now Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, it's yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Schakowsky. Thanks for holding this important hearing, and to all the witnesses for testifying today. In our December hearing on holding Big Tech accountable, I discussed how these platforms prioritize profits over people by keeping users engaged. These direct design choices have a profound impact on children and adolescents who are using these platforms, and we've seen an increasing connection between time spent on new media and mental health issues we're seeing in children and adolescents. In this increasingly digital age, we need to be vigilant in reevaluating how these design choices impact children, and we need to work to prevent subsequent harms online. I know previous questioners from my colleagues have asked some of these questions, and I'm gonna try to build on them. I wanna start just by getting each of you on record with the same question I asked at the subcommittee's previous tech accountability hearing. To the panel, are social media companies conducting business online actively making the choice to prioritize profits and engagement over combating disinformation, violent content, and negative health outcomes for individuals and children? Just a yes or no answer. Ms. Lehman?
Yes.
Ms. McNinnis?
Yes.
Ms. Nkande?
Yes.
Mr. Duffy?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Lehman, are there ways in which the design features or algorithms of these platforms can take advantage of young people in particular, leading to worse outcomes? Do these design choices increase the likelihood that children will be exposed to divisive, violent, hurtful, or inappropriate content?
Absolutely. So right now, a lot of what is most exciting about the transparency things before us today is that there is not enough information to have a good sense of how exactly some of these platforms are making these design choices. We understand they are, but we don't know the intricacies of exactly how to fix it. A lot of this legislation allows us that insight, and also starts to force platforms to consider ways that their algorithmic systems are designed, ways that they're it starts, as you said, when they're prioritizing profits over people, it starts to combat that. It provides, because ultimately they do need incentives to do so.
Thank you. Ms. McManus, what responsibility do tech companies have to protect children from manipulative marketing, content and product recommendations, and targeted advertising? Should these companies have some level of responsibility for a failure to protect our young users?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question, Representative. We encourage tech companies to take more responsibility over the kinds of tracking that they're using online and how that tracking encourages other third parties to target users with misinformation, disinformation, and other offers that may be inappropriate, especially for children.
Thank you. Ms. Lehman and Ms. Nkande, do you believe that without legislation, companies will take the necessary steps to protect children from manipulative practices on their platforms? How would the legislation under consideration today ensure that regulators and researchers have the tools and information necessary to protect children and adolescents using these platforms? Why don't we start with Ms. Nkande?
I don't think that any of the companies are incentivized to protect children because they are publicly traded companies. Therefore, their first priority is to their shareholders. This legislation would create that hand in the same way that in the age of robber barons, Congress had to come in and create an incentive. In terms of transparency, knowing the harm allows us to have a targeted and appropriate remedy that can maintain innovation and business in the United States while protecting our children, who, in my humble opinion as a mother, are our greatest asset.
Ms. Lehman, 20 seconds. Can you give us a quick answer?
Yes, I would echo Ms. Nkande. And right, we know from previous hearings that platforms don't action don't action maybe even 3 to 5% of hate, of violence, and of incitement. These problems are rampant, and I think if certainly the transparency would lend itself to public accountability for that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back, and Mr. Pence, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Schakowsky and Ranking Member Bilirakis, and thank the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to kind of give you a background a little bit where I'm at on this with some statements. Like many of my colleagues, I'm increasingly concerned with the growth at any cost mindset of Silicon Valley. Social media platforms employ algorithms that promote inflammatory, addictive content to elicit the strongest level of user engagement. You know, as we've talked about with children, that's a horrible thing. More clicks lead to more data that fuels a more lucrative online advertising business model. Efforts to keep users glued to their screen is at the heart of this business model. You know, we know that's true because everybody's got their nose in their phone all the time. Our public disclosures have become overtly divisive. Our younger generations have developed unhealthy addictions to social media, and an individual's right to privacy is disregarded. The online environment of intrusive data collection and inflammatory content is not the only option. I'm encouraged to hear the conversation today and the level of agreement we have on problems facing Hoosiers and all Americans as it pertains to big tech. It's time that we start acting and advance holistic solutions that will rein in big tech and produce real results to protect our constituents online. Our constituents should have more control over how their personal information is collected and used online, or, and this is where I deviate a little bit, receive fair compensation when their information is collected and sold, as it's happening absolutely nonstop. Ms. McInnes, in a previous hearing, I discussed whether or not social media platforms could still be profitable without the ability to monetize content that has been adjudicated to be harmful to users. Likewise, DuckDuckGo is a profitable company that claims to not engage in surveillance advertising. Concerns have been raised that if Congress limits a platform's ability to engage in automated surveillance advertising tools, small businesses will suffer from a lack of reach, which I wrestle with that. However, as you referenced in your testimony, research shows only modest gains for the user of behaviorally targeted ads. I hear that a lot from the small businesses that use social media. Some it's good for, but the vast majority, it says it gets nothing for me. And yet, oddly, advertisers are very willing to pay a premium for what they believe extends their reach. Is it reach or extends their data collection? If the outcome for online advertising is similar to what you can expect from other methods, the only difference becomes the amount of information Google or Facebook or any of the other big tech can gather from you and your business or you personally. What has the experience been like at DuckDuckGo for small businesses seeking to advertise their products to potential consumers from your perspective?
Thank you for the question, Representative. Unfortunately, we syndicate our contextual ads through Microsoft, so Microsoft would have the best data on how small businesses have utilized the platform. That said, DuckDuckGo is a smaller tech company that's competing against the giants. We also use contextual ads, and we've used the contextual ads on our services as well. So we've proven that this is a profitable model for us. In addition, many small businesses have been using contextual ads to their benefit. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to discriminate in the targeting of advertisements also enables companies to discriminate in the opportunities that they present to users, meaning that some smaller businesses may be discriminated against in the provision of financial resources, rental opportunities, housing agreements, and other things that make their small business possible.
Well, I would even say, I appreciate that comment, I would even say in sales too. They get limited, it depends on who's collecting the data and who they're dispersing that data to is a real problem for me. Ms. Inconde, what's your answer to that same question? And that question was your experience with small businesses, the value there. Are they making money off this data collection of big tech?
I would actually agree with your assessment that the returns are actually on the tech company side in terms of more data, because with more data, you can create more products, you have more insight, and the rate of return can be negligible. But that's not to say all the time. There are some businesses that are able to benefit, but not in the same way that the big giants do.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, I think it's time we start talking about being us receiving some benefit for all the data that's being collected on us. And thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and now my colleague from Illinois, Congresswoman Kelly, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Schakowsky, for holding this hearing today and for the witnesses appearing before us. I'm delighted to see that one of the bills recommended by the ENC Racial Equity Working Group, the Algorithmic Accountability Act, will be considered here. And all the while, little bits of their activity get collected and put toward creating an online profile of a user's wants, likes, and dislikes. In the real work, more and more decisions are being made by artificial intelligence from data collected from what we do online. Large amounts of data are combined to make predictions with little knowledge of the underlying data used to train the algorithm or the potential bias that is encoded in the system. One of the more difficult conversations to have around AI, what it means for AI to be transparent or explainable. Ms. Nkande, in an interview last year with Stanford's Engineering's The Future of Everything podcast, you mentioned that impact assessment information would be more useful than opening up an algorithm and seeing what's inside. Can you elaborate on this? Is it either or? Is it an either or situation? Or how would the Algorithmic Accountability Act, how would it help biases in how algorithms are designed and the outcomes they produce?
Congresswoman Kelly, I would suggest that because we're looking for accountability, the impact of the technology is way more important than the longitudinal algebra that it took to create the algorithm, because those statistical models are going to be visible to very few people in the population. And from an oversight perspective, Congress just needs to know are these products in line of the laws of our land? And for that, you just need impact.
Thank you. Ms. Lehman, in your testimony, you point out the imbalance that the FTC often faces going up against some of the largest tech companies in the world. The Digital Services Oversight and Safety Act and the Algorithmic Accountability Act include increased FTC staffs and funding, albeit at different levels. Can you explain how the current imbalance of FTC staffing harms the ability of the government to stop bad actors?
Absolutely. Thank you, Congresswoman. So the FTC today is a fraction of the size it was 40 years ago, even while the economies from some of the largest platforms alone were unthinkable at that time. And so the kinds of resources that the FTC has to combat the systemic problems throughout this industry is the fact that we are still smaller than compared to the outsized growth there. We can only consumers will only benefit from a fully empowered FTC that has the level of expertise and funding to effectively go after these industries.
Thank you. And Ms. McInnes, do you have anything to add?
We likewise support a fully funded and resourced Federal Trade Commission. One of the best things that the Federal Trade Commission and indeed the U.S. government can do right now is enforce our existing rules and laws. And so we encourage the Federal Trade Commission to not only enforce their laws, but also consider where they could act to protect users, perhaps through examining new rules under the Children's Online Privacy Protective Act, or acting against dark patterns that we're seeing online under their Section 5 authority.
Thank you. The European Union has already started their work towards an AI law. Their bills differ in many ways from the bills being considered today, but share some important similarities. Ms. Lehman, how would the Algorithmic Accountability Act align with European efforts to regulate AI? And how do they differ on taking risk-based approaches?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So in the EU, there have been proposed legislation, there's been proposed regulation that would put algorithms into different risk buckets. And so this is where they differ insofar as they would go so far as to ban algorithms in the use of like the highest risk buckets, thinking about like social credit scoring. There'd be more regulations around how they can be used in some of the medium risk buckets, and transparency in the lowest risk buckets. We're a little bit earlier on in our AI regulation discussions, and so in the U.S., the primary mechanism we have right now in the Algo Accountability Act is impact assessments and that transparency. So getting a sense of, okay, what are the effects of these systems?
Thank you. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Next, I call on Mr. Soto for his 5 minutes. Mr. Soto, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we look at 7 in 10 Americans using social media platforms, that actually even sounds pretty low for me. Most people I know use social media, right? And the practice of sharing user data to target advertisements has led to discrimination based upon race and gender on occasion. 42% of Americans experience online harassment over the past year, 42%. And social media companies have consistently denied and blocked the needed data for us to do independent research and government research. But there's hope, right? Because while we know so many Americans are using social media, privacy online is an issue that affects most Americans. And the big headline from this hearing today is that the Energy and Commerce Committee, Democrats and Republicans, are coming together to propose bipartisan agendas, bipartisan bills to protect America's privacy online. And Madam Chair, I want to thank you and the ranking member, for my fellow Floridian Gus Bilirakis, for your leadership on this. Banning Surveillance Advertising Act of 2021. It prohibited advertisers from targeting advertisements based upon personal information that links the consumer's connected device, basically hunting down who you are by your device rather than by your preferences and what you avail yourself to online. The second bill, the Algorithm Accountability Act of 2022, which would conduct impact assessments on the algorithms that are mysterious to so many folks, and have regular reporting of these results to the Federal Trade Commission to make sure they're fair against discrimination, against anti-consumer issues, against all sorts of nefarious things that can happen if we leave it just to machines to make these decisions. The third bill, Cooperation Among Police, Tech, and Users to Resist Exploitation Act, or the Capture Act. I want to give a compliment to my fellow Floridian, the ranking member, Gus Bilirakis, on this great bill on how social media companies communicate, consult, and coordinate with federal, state, and local law enforcement to address illegal content and activity online. We have to protect our kids. We have to protect our families. My wife is an assistant principal in Central Florida, and we see kids being exposed to adult content that has really hurt their childhood and has made it harder on educators and particularly on parents. Increasing consumer education of law enforcement resources by Rep. Mullen that requires the FTC to work with the Attorney General to develop educational programs to inform the public on resources available should they feel their safety or security was violated. Right now, many Americans don't know where to go, and this is a key part. And then finally, the Digital Services Oversight and Safety Act of 2022, which establishes the Bureau of Digital Services Oversight and Safety, a long-time need at the FTC to beef up their oversight of social media platforms under the FTC. Thank you, Special Agent Duffy, for being here. Welcome from Florida, at least virtually. We appreciate you testifying today. What are the types of criminal acts and dangers you see online from Floridians from your role at FDLE?
Thank you, Representative.
Yes, we could hear you. So what are the types of criminal acts online that you end up seeing in Florida and the dangers?
We see everything that you could think of and more. There's not a day that goes by that we aren't learning something new. Everything from the drug trade to individuals selling other personal information from other people's accounts. It has really become the modern day means of communication amongst all criminal activity. They establish groups using different platforms, leveraging encryption services to hide behind a curtain that we are not privy to. So it is increasingly becoming a challenge, as you mentioned, with today's youth and the content that they get exposed to on a daily basis, the mental health impact that it has on them, and the lack of oversight in the amount of content that they view is growing each and every day. So if you can think of a criminal activity from selling somebody's house that they live in to compromising a bank account to title fraud, car fraud, it is all occurring in a digital environment.
Thank you, Special Agent Duffy. Together we can empower parents, families, educators, consumers, prevent discrimination with this critical agenda, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and now Congresswoman Craig, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for yielding. Ms. Lehman, I want to start by thanking you for providing such thoughtful and helpful testimony across so many different areas related to holding big tech accountable, and for calling out Snapchat in your Section 230 reform ideas. I've raised my concerns about Snapchat serving as an illegal marketplace for drugs in prior big tech hearings, and I want to continue my focus on the issue during today's hearing as well. As my colleagues may recall, I have a constituent in Hastings, Minnesota, Bridget Noring, who she and her family lost their son Devin to a fentanyl overdose and is asking us to do more. I'm here today raising her voice and that of countless other parents in hopes that we can come together and find a solution. Special Agent Duffy, thank you for what you do in law enforcement every single day to help to crack down on these illegal online sales. I strongly believe we need to give our law enforcement agencies the tools, resources, and funding they need to help protect our communities, both online and in the physical world, from dangerous drug overdoses. You may have seen recent news stories online talking about changes Snapchat was taking to curb drug dealing on the app. Under pressure from parents like Bridget and other parents who called on the CEO to do more and do better. Based on your experience, though, Agent Duffy, and in training those who use apps to conduct investigations, I'm hoping you can briefly walk us through what the current process looks like when you attempt to target a known drug dealer and hold them to account on an app like Snapchat.
Thank you, Representative. When we begin these types of investigations with companies like Snapchat, we are oftentimes the ones being provided it through a citizen that becomes concerned. And in some cases, some companies will police themselves and identify content, but ultimately, they are seemingly less proactive in trying to remove some of this content and leaving it for law enforcement to become proactive on their own site, which is a challenge as we struggle with retention of law enforcement officers around the United States. So these investigations begin with us identifying a criminal activity. Then we begin to serve legal process, which becomes the first hurdle in trying to identify what the company has retained or what they haven't retained, which becomes the first struggle. And then as we progress through the app, we end up at internet service providers and cellular providers because the means of using these apps are done through mobile devices. And so the mobile device itself, through the companies that provide the service, we run again into another issue of data retention and activity that may or may not be kept, along with these criminal activities being used with a virtual private network, meaning they're using a service that ultimately hides their internet activity, in which no records are often found. So we run into many roadblocks. I say we have less successes than we have incomplete cases because of those things that I mentioned.
Special Agent Duffy, you mentioned that the Snapchat or other platforms sometimes will proactively contact law enforcement, but most of the time it's citizens who are doing the trolling on these platforms and contacting you. And I would assume that oftentimes that's because a family member has suffered some sort of catastrophic outcome or at least some harm. What do you think the responsibility of the social media platform should be in terms of being proactive on their platform?
Thank you. I think the responsibility is all in their favor. They should be the ones content moderating. They should be the ones communicating and learning from law enforcement, who's learning from kids in school and friends and family. Having that open conversation will only benefit them. Right now, we see many of the companies ignoring or not having that communication with the public and law enforcement. They think that they can, in a sense, take it upon themselves to learn it or wait to become reactive. So I think if you're going to build a platform environment for kids to operate on, then you need to be responsible for taking action and learning what to look for.
Thank you so much. Amen to that. And with that, I'm sorry I'm out of time, but the topic, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and now I welcome as a wave on to our subcommittee, Mr. Walden. Wahlberg, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to wave on to this hearing. This is the third legislative hearing the committee has held on holding big tech accountable. But once again, I believe it fails to address one of the most pressing issues. It's personal, of course, but the need for a comprehensive national privacy and data security framework. Though many of the proposals today are admirable, they include components that should be considered in a comprehensive framework, not as a piecemeal set of bills. Members of the committee need to get back to our bipartisan work to create this framework. Privacy and children's privacy in particular should be a no-brainer. Despite what the gentlelady from Florida said earlier, there already is bipartisan COPPA bill in the House. I and my good friend Congressman Rush introduced the Protect Kids Act, which would update and modernize COPPA for the online behavior and devices of today. The legislation was introduced last Congress, and I'd be glad to work with her on this issue. This is another reason why I'm disappointed that the majority denied Republicans' second request to include this legislation in today's hearing. I'm committed to finding a bipartisan agreement on COPPA as a part of a larger privacy package, and I hope that the majority will work with us to find common ground on our proposals. Ms. McGinnis, my Protect Kids Act adds precise geolocation and biometric information as two new categories of personal information, which are protected for children under COPPA. I believe that behavioral ads can be beneficial for adults, but many of those benefits do not translate when it comes to kids. And so, how can companies like TikTok design their platforms to better protect this type of information for children without the negative effects that a blanket ban on ad targeting would have for small and local businesses?
Thank you for the question, Representative. We encourage companies like TikTok to stem the amount of data that they're collecting from all users, especially children. DuckDuckGo is a search engine, and so I can't speak to many of the issues presenting social media companies in particular. But we do think that there's more that companies could be doing proactively to protect users, and also ways they could be adjusting their algorithm to ensure that they're not causing the sort of mental health and other relevant harms that we've seen Frances Haugen speak about with regards to Facebook, and we know are being perpetrated online. But regardless, the fact that this company can target users and adjust their algorithm in order to kind of reach users in this moment of mental health crisis or kind of anything related to that means that they're collecting too much information on us all, much less kids.
Yeah. Thank you for that. My legislation also raises the age for parental consent protections for children online from 13 to 16 years of age. I've lost their votes now, but I think it's a responsible approach to take. I support raising the age of COPPA, but Mr. Duffy, in your testimony, you highlight how children and tweens frequently bypass parental consent protections in order to socialize online. Mr. Duffy, can you elaborate on the dangers that those between ages of 13 and 16 face on social media sites and how those dangers may differ from those under 13? And also, what should Congress be considering to address age restrictions online?
Thank you, Representative. I would offer to the committee that when we talk about 13 to 16 years old, in talking with mental health professionals, I would offer up their thoughts and opinions and medical concerns, because the content that you view at the age of 13 versus the content that you're viewing at 16 is going to, what we've seen with the kids, is going to greatly impact potential behavior and acts that they move forward with as they grow. When we talk about this today, circumvent an issue because it will never stop today's youth from bypassing age restrictions.
And parents can be an asset.
Yes, they very much can, but they need to be educated as well.
Thank you. I see my time has expired, and thank you for allowing me to wave on.
Thank you, Mr. Wahlberg. And now, I am happy to have the opportunity to wave on to this, this subcommittee, Congresswoman Eshoo, who is the author and chief sponsor of the banning surveillance advertising bill that we are considering today. Ms. Eshoo, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for not only holding this hearing, but welcoming me to wave on to your subcommittee. I thank you for partnering with me on the Banning Surveillance Advertising Act. If our colleague Bobby Rush is still with us, I want to thank him as well. First, I want to go to Ms. McGinnis. Thank you for your excellent testimony and for your support of my legislation. To my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, you may not know, but my bill does go after the root of the social media problem, which is a toxic business model. Critics say that there can't be an internet economy without surveillance ads. They've really poured it on, that, the internet will implode without this. But I view it another way. And I think so does DuckDuckGo, because it's a counter example. So I want to respond just briefly to a few questions related to the criticism that opponents of my bill cite very often. And if you could keep your responses brief, I'd really appreciate that. So to Ms. McGinnis, have you found that contextual advertising to be less effective than behavioral advertising?
We have not. We use contextual advertising ourselves, not only to fund the business, but also to reach new and potential users of the DuckDuckGo services. In addition, I've spoken often about the need to invest more in the contextual advertising model. Just because the ad duopoly from Facebook and Google are asserting to us that behavioral ads work better, it's not true that contextual ads can't be just as relevant.
Do you hear major complaints from users that your ads are not relevant enough?
We syndicate our advertisements from Microsoft's Bing. We find that users are coming to us primarily for privacy protection, and we offer them best-in-class privacy protection, relevant results, and quality services while also protecting their privacy. We're hopeful that with the bill like Banning Surveillance Advertising Act of 2022, we will have more competition in the contextual ad market, which will not only enable more companies to compete against Facebook and Google's ad duopoly, but also enable small businesses to go to more advertisers rather than just the two big monopolies in town to source their advertisements.
Quick questions. Are small businesses able to use contextual ads to reach their customers? And the other question is, will the internet break? Will the internet break without surveillance ads? Maybe you should take that first.
The internet will not break without surveillance ads. And in fact, DuckDuckGo is proof positive that you can have a successful and profitable company without surveilling users. In addition, small businesses can use contextual ads to reach their users, and indeed many do, because contextual ads are cheaper and usually provide users with the same amount of revenue in return. We've cited some studies from researchers like Alessandro Quisti pointing out that behavioral advertising does not, in fact, result in much added revenue for publishers, and we think that's also true for small businesses.
Wonderful. Let me go to Ms. Akande. Thank you for your powerful testimony and for everything that you're doing in this space. Can you state to members and whomever is tuned in about the harms that ad targeting have caused people, particularly people of color. I think that this is, I know what the answer is, but I would like to have you put it out on the table so that people have even more clarity about this.
So what we found in the election space is our adversaries really take advantage of racial divides in this country by targeting advertising online towards Black communities. And we've heard earlier in this hearing, Spanish-speaking communities when they want to divide and weaken us. So what your bill actually does is add national security protections on top of this, on top of all the other protections, because without that targeted advertising, it breaks down that pathway.
Thank you, and I yield back, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for having me with you. It's a terrific subcommittee.
The gentlelady yields back. I thank her for her presence with us today. Seeing no more members who have questions, I want to sincerely thank our witnesses for your participation today. This was really a great hearing. All of you contributed so much to the discussions that we need to be having, so I thank you. And I want to remind members that pursuant to committee rules, they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record to be answered by the witnesses who have appeared today. And I certainly ask each witness to respond promptly as you can to any of the questions that you may receive. With that, before we adjourn, I request unanimous consent to enter the following documents into the record. A letter from the Association of National Advertisers, a letter from the, what is that? Interactive I'll start again. A letter from the Interactive Advertising Bureau, a report from New York University, a letter from the Software and Information Industry Association, a letter from the FTC, a letter to the FTC, a letter from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And without objection, so ordered. I want to see if my ranking member had anything he wanted to add.
I'm good. I appreciate everything you've done today, and we hope we
Say,
can...
put that, yeah, go ahead.
No, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate it very much. And I want to thank the witnesses and the panel, and also we want to get these bills moved forward with a markup and get them on the floor as soon as possible. It's particularly when it comes to the social media and what it's doing to our children is unacceptable. We have to hold these companies accountable. So thank you for bringing it to our attention today. And again, I appreciate it very much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
At this time, the subcommittee is adjourned. Thank you.